We are looking this summer at various prayers from the Bible and kind of calling it the Summer of Prayer and focusing on just how it is that we need to pray. And one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that prayer is often just asking God for things. We sometimes tend to reduce it to that. Even sometimes the notion of, be careful, I don't want to be misunderstood, but sometimes the notion of a prayer chain, it's sort of like we have an urgent request, and if we just kind of gang up on God somehow, he'll give us what we want. Now, I'm not saying we think that, but sometimes, yeah, please, but sometimes it kind of comes across that way. Fact is that we want to communicate and share with God. In fact, prayer ought to be a blessing to us. Prayer ought to be a means by which we grow. Prayer changes things, and sometimes one of the things that prayer changes is you or me, that we are better people, better believers for following Jesus, for having prayed. So we have to realize that we don't always get what we want. I know that sounds like I'm quoting Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, but in a way maybe I am. Okay, you don't always get what you want. Okay, because you don't always get what you want. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking, but God's will and God's plan is often much more involved than what we realize, and we tend to focus on, this was one of the themes, we got a movie night coming up this Friday, right? Yep, this Friday night. I'm going to watch I Can Only Imagine. The one last month we watched The Shack, and it was interesting because one of the issues in The Shack is we tend to judge morality from our own, how does it benefit me? Whereas there are much bigger issues at play in there. How does it benefit God's people? I was struck by the last phrase, the last sentence here of this psalm today, may your blessing be on your people. Our prayers ought always to be not just focused on ourselves exclusively, but also on praying for what is God's overall will, what is best for God's people. That's really what we need to pray about. So some interesting challenges that these texts give us. Now, this particular one, I didn't mean to do it that way. It's all right. This particular one, Psalm 3, is 8 verses long, and you heard Val read it earlier. Let me just go over it with you again. David writes, Lord, how many are my foes? Notice there's an exclamation point at the end of that sentence, not a question. Lord, how many are my foes? How many do I have? 2, 3, half a dozen? 500? No, this is a statement of declaration. Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Notice the exclamation point. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him, but you, Lord, are a shield around me. I call out to the Lord. He answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Now, I don't think any of us have ever had that. David, I suppose, theoretically could have. When you're king of the whole nation of Israel, you could have a few thousand enemies. But I doubt that you and I have that many. It may feel like we do sometimes. It may feel like just everything is just falling apart. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. By the way, this psalm is quoted in Jonah's psalm in Jonah chapter 2. When Jonah prays to the Lord, he says, it's from the Lord that deliverance comes. So it's kind of interesting that many years later that Job speaks or quotes this same psalm. Now, some interesting things about this psalm. And, of course, when you study the Psalms, you realize that each psalm, and it's more or less certain with various psalms, but they plug into various events in the Old Testament, particularly ones that are associated with David. So when we find the Psalms of David and we look at the life of David, we can make connection between what was going on in David's life and what the psalm is all about. So we get his perspective, if you will. Okay? Now, a couple of things about this psalm. First of all, it is the first of the psalms that's attributed to King David. Psalm 1 is, blessed is the one who does not walk in the way of sinners or stand in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law, in the law of God. He meditates day and night, right? He's like a tree planted by the rivers of water. It's this nice introduction to the Psalter. And then, of course, you have Psalm 2. But this is the first one in all the Psalms. David did not write all of the Psalms. He wrote a lot of them, but he didn't write all of them. This is one of them that is attributed to him. It's the first of such Psalms. It is also the first of what we call the lament psalms. This is a psalm when he's just purging himself of all the pain and all the emotion that he feels. It contains the first use of the word Selah. That's a musical group, by the way, a Christian. It used to be. I haven't really heard much from them in recent years, but there was a Christian band that called themselves Selah. It's a Hebrew word. We aren't exactly sure what it means, but most likely it means like take a break. Okay? For those of you that are musicians, you know that you come to a point where you have a rest or you have an interlude between one verse. So probably the idea was the first 4 verses of this psalm were to be read, and then there was probably some musical accompaniment played on a harp or something so that you could meditate on what it was that the psalmist had just said. And then usually after the Selah, the psalm was in a different direction, often a more positive sort of direction. It is described in the superscription as a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. This is the event that comes out of the life of David from which this psalm arises. I'm sure that over the years, those of us that are fathers and have sons have butted heads with them at times. We all do that. Okay, it all happens. Okay, we feel sometimes a bit betrayed by them. Okay, I raised my son a Michigan fan, and then he moved to South Bend, and over time, those evil Irish fans wore him down. And he became a fan of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I've never quite forgiven him for that. No, I'm kidding. Way, way bigger things than that. I'm just joking. Okay? That's about as bad as it gets for us. But I mean, this is a son that wants his father's kingdom, wants his father's job. And the implication is there's nothing in the text that ever says that Absalom said, kill my father, kill David. But that's basically what it would have come to. So it's a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Absalom was a handsome guy. He really was. He was a guy that everybody looked at and admired him. He was very charismatic in his personality. He would get folks who would, oh yes, Absalom, David's a pretty charismatic guy too. David was very much one who appreciated all things. A beautiful woman, a beautiful psalm. He was a musician. He was a shepherd. He was a military leader. He was a general. He was an administrator. He was all these things. He had a lot of good qualities. And Absalom appears to have been every bit as much able to sort of win the hearts or steal the hearts of the people of Israel as David did. Now, remember, this all comes about after David's adultery with Bathsheba. David's life after 2 Samuel 11, where 2 Samuel 11 concludes with that rather obvious statement, but the thing that David did displeased the Lord. That's where it goes. Everything from there, it's kind of downhill. And there are a number of things that happen. First of all, there's the story of Amnon and Tamar. Okay? Both of these were David's children, although by different mothers. And there's a rather sordid story in the text. I won't go into a lot of detail. But Amnon becomes lovesick or lust-sick toward his sister Tamar and is convinced by his own brother to feign illness and asks for his half-sister Tamar to come and bring him something to eat or whatever so he'll feel better. But it's all a ruse, it's all a trick. And so when he gets her in the room, when she comes in the room, there's nobody else there but the two of them. He grabs her and forces himself upon her. She pleads with him and begs not to do so. In fact, she says, rather sadly, just ask my father and he'll give you to me. You don't have to do this. But he doesn't care. And then after he assaults her, the text says that he hated her. That he hated her with a hatred that was greater than the lust or the passion that he'd had with her before he violated her. And if you know anything at all about this kind of assault, you know that's often the case. If you've watched enough episodes of NCIS, or not NCIS, but Law and Order Special Victims Unit, this is the sort of thing you see a lot. Okay? So you got this mess going on. Okay? After this happens, by the way, Tamar has a brother, a full brother, same father, same mother. David's her father as well as Absalom. Absalom is her full brother, and he takes vengeance on Amnon and kills him. So David's family becomes not only a place of sexual violation, but also becomes a place of murder. Absalom, okay? Absalom, David's son, tries to make himself king over Israel in the place of his father David. And he has a rather brilliant scheme to do this. He hangs out at the temple near the royal palace. And he's standing there, and people come to see, and he says, what have you come to see the king about today? And they say, well, this is what I'm concerned about. And they have this complaint or whatever. So they come to David, and they want to come to David. And Absalom says, oh, you're right. You have a valid complaint. If only the king had somebody who would be willing to listen to you and act on your concern. We know what Absalom's doing. He's trying to win, and that's what he does. In fact, the text says that Absalom won the hearts of the people of Israel. So Absalom eventually becomes king, and David has to flee the city of Jerusalem up the Mount of Olives for his own protection, to save his own life. Then we have Ziba and Mephibosheth, okay? Not Ziba, not Ziba with a B, okay? Now, the story here basically is Mephibosheth was the grandson of Saul. And David, when he became king, very wisely said, is there anyone left of the household of Saul to whom I can show kindness? David wanted to have a smooth transition. He wanted to earn the love and respect of the people of Israel as he became their new king. And they said, well, there's one guy, his name is Mephibosheth, but he's crippled in his feet. Because when he was a little boy, the maid carried him, she tripped and fell, and his legs were injured, and he's never been the same again. He's never been able to walk. And so David shows all kinds of kindness to Mephibosheth. Now, as David, on this instance, a little later, as David is fleeing the city of Jerusalem, he hears from Ziba, who's one of his trusted aides, that, oh, Mephibosheth, remember Mephibosheth? Remember the grandson of Saul? The one you show kindness to? You know what he's doing? He's going around saying, ooh, this might be my opportunity. If David is going to be run out of Dodge, I might be able to, because I'm the grandson of Saul, I might be able to become king myself. Now, that wasn't true. It turned out that was not true. But David had no way of knowing that one way or the other. And so David thought that the very person of the family of Saul to whom he had shown kindness was, in fact, looking to steal David's throne from him as well. It wasn't true, but that's what he thought. Ahithophel. This guy, maybe you've heard of, maybe you've not. Ahithophel was David's most trusted advisor. But Ahithophel licked his finger, put it up in the wind, and he says, oh, I think I know what's going to happen here. I think Absalom's rebellion is going to be successful. And so he goes over to the side of Absalom against David after being David's most trusted advisor. It'd be like Robin going to work for the Joker. Think of it in that kind of pop cultural metaphor, right? What happens with Ahithophel? Well, the point in time comes where Ahithophel realizes that Absalom's rebellion is not going to work. And so what does Ahithophel do? He puts his affairs in order. He goes out and hangs himself. Does that sound familiar? So Ahithophel is David's most trusted aide. He turns against David to destroy him. Then, on the way up the Mount of Olives, David is marching with his soldiers, fleeing from the city, and there's a guy who's related to Saul. His name is Shimei. And Shimei just starts cursing David, just cursing at him. Calls him a murderer and all that sort of stuff. Throws rocks at him, and the soldiers say, you want us to kill him? And David says, no, he's speaking the truth. What he says is true. Don't allow him to live. And so all the way up the Mount of Olives, Shimei is taunting and throwing rocks. Talk about losing dignity. This is where David is. Ahithophel has betrayed him. Shimei is cursing him, and at the very least, probably not hurting him, just not throwing not heavy stones, but embarrassing him, okay? Losing his dignity. And the whole thing with Amnon and Tamar and the embarrassment and the threat, I mean, it's embarrassing, it's also a threat of Absalom, he's not in a good situation. This is where this psalm comes from. This is what the circumstances are that give rise to this psalm. So David says, first of all, he says, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Now, David had many enemies, as well as friends who betrayed him. And it shows that there were those of the family of Saul that presumably when they had the opportunity, Shimei is a classic example. For all that David knows, Ahithophel's the same way, but he wasn't actually betraying him. But David had enemies, perhaps from the family of Saul, perhaps others. Right? I've always found it interesting that if a president has an approval rating of 51%, they say, oh, that's really good. Oh, so when almost half the people in the country don't like you, that's good? Well, in political terms, I suppose it is. When you've got all these enemies, okay, as well as friends who betrayed him, David must have been at an emotional low. There's no doubt about it whatsoever in my understanding that he was at an emotional low. Even his friends presumably thought that not even God could help him. So he starts out by saying, I got more enemies than I can count. I got more people rising up against me, it's just from every direction. Not only that, but this must have really hurt. He says, even other people who are not necessarily involved in trying to hurt me or get rid of me or destroy me or even kill me, many of them are saying, oh, not even God can save him now. He's past the point of no return. His sell-by date is long since expired. There's nothing, even God can't help him now. So you've got people that despise you, that want to see you dead, want to see you removed, and they're getting the upper hand. And then even the people that are on your side are saying, I don't think even God can get you out of this mess. That's a pretty low point to be. But that's where he is, and that's where the psalm comes from. So he's letting God know what his situation is. He says, but you, O Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts up my head. Those in verse 2 who said God will not deliver him were just simply flat out wrong. You, Lord, are a shield around me. God as a shield is reminiscent of Genesis 15 in verse 1, where God says to Abraham, I am your shield and your eternal great reward. Now, this is right after Abraham has conquered the four kings and, rescued Lot and rescued Lot's family and brought them all back. And he's had the encounter with the priest of God, Most High, okay, that appears to him there in Genesis 14. Okay, my God is king. Okay, it's a tremendous scene. But when that's over and the dust settles, okay, then it's like, what do I do now? I'm a marked man. There's 4 nations that are going to be, whose leaders and kings know what I did. They're going to be out to get me. What am I supposed to do? And so God tells him in Genesis 15:1, I am your shield and your exceeding great reward. And David says, you, Lord, are a shield. What he's doing is he's claiming Genesis 15:1. David knows his Bible. Knows it. He wrote a lot of it, okay? But he knows the Torah. He knows the law of Moses. He knows what the law of Moses is saying. God lifts up David's head also by crowning him as king of Israel. I got a little picture here. You can see the king, that he has to lift up his head for the crown to be placed upon it. And he says, I don't care what other people say, but I know what God says. God says, I'm the king of Israel. And so he's got this situation going on. 2 things. Number one, his enemies want to destroy him, and they're almost more than he even wants to count. His enemies want to destroy him. Even his friends are saying, there's no deliverance for him now. But he says, despite all of that, I know the truth of God and who God is. That you, O Lord, are a shield around me and my glory, the one who lifts up my head. So he says, I call out to the Lord and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. This is a theme you'll often see in the Old Testament, that God is on his holy mountain. Right? I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? Why does the psalmist say, I lift up my eyes to the hills? Because that's where the enemy's going to come riding over the top of that hill to get you. I lift up my eyes to the hills, and I don't know what's going to happen. From where does my strength come? My strength comes from the Lord. So there's always this. The fact is, it doesn't matter who's sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter who's at 600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I know that we are probably more divided than ever as a nation, even among Christian people, about issues of a political nature. But I want you to know that whoever the president is, whatever you think of the president, please understand that ultimately it is God who rules over all. And whether you like the president you have now or whether you don't, whether you say, oh, I'm glad we got the one we got now, or whether you say, oh, I wish we'd have gotten the other one, or even another one, well, I understand those feelings, okay? That's perfectly fine. But please understand that no matter who is in Washington, D.C., or Moscow, or wherever, that it is the Lord who answers from his holy mountain. And then David says, I lie down and sleep. I awake again because the Lord sustains me. I was reading something the other day, and then I just happened to stumble across it. There's a little meme that said, during the day, I'm so tired I can't think about anything. At night, my mind is going so crazy thinking about everything I can't sleep. You ever been there, right? That you have all these things during the daytime, and they bother you, and you deal with them. Then you lay down in bed at night, and it's like, oh, what do I do now? And you can't get to sleep because your mind. This is one of the things. If you have worry or doubt or concern or whatever it is, this is one of the best ways it will show itself. You can't sleep at night. I'm not even talking about physical pain or physical oppression so much as I am just emotional stress, emotional strain. Just the fact that I can't sleep. Why can't I sleep? Because I got all these issues, I got all these problems, I got all these things I have to think about. Remember what 1 Peter says. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he will exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him because he cares for you. How do you humble yourself before God? How do I humble myself before God? By simply casting all my cares upon him. I referenced this text not too long ago, and I said, what if I decided to humble myself by simply taking all my bills and just giving them to you? I don't have to worry about them then. Just give them to you. I'm sure among all of you, you could figure out a way to pay off my bills. You say, that's pretty arrogant if you think we're going to do that for you. I say, no, I'm humbling myself by giving you all my bills and asking you to pay them. No, Andy, you're not humbling yourself. You're being a jerk. Okay? But yet that's what we do when we give them to God, because, every problem that I hang on to, that I lose sleep over, I'm saying, you know what, God can't take care of this. I got to do this myself. I don't think so. When you keep your problems and issues to yourself, you're basically saying, I don't think God can handle this. You ought to be able. Now, again, it may not be easy. Depends on your personality. Depends on your physical makeup. Depends on your degree of melatonin and all that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, if you're really trusting in God, you should be able to lie down and sleep and then awake again because the Lord sustains me. I was thinking about that. I was sleeping, and we got that little back porch at the lighthouse there, and they keep the window open because it gets kind of stuffy at night. And I'm thinking, I'm laying asleep there all several hours, and I'm thinking, pretty vulnerable. You realize how vulnerable you are when you're sleeping? I was lying on the couch at my son and daughter-in-law's one time, and I was asleep lying on the couch. And my wife came in. She didn't think I was asleep. She said, Andy, you want to do, sorry, okay. And then I'm laying there while I kind of go back to sleep, and then the dog comes up and starts licking me, I'm trying to sleep, okay? Go away, leave me alone. My son and daughter-in-law went to Bethel College in Indiana, which is an Arminian college. They'll say that. That's their theological reference point. And they named their dog Calvin. I just find that hilarious. If you want, I'll explain that to you afterwards if you need that. So how are you sleeping? It's one of the best ways to judge how much you're trusting God. How are you sleeping at night? I'm not talking about physical pain that keeps you awake. I'm just talking about, I can't give this to God. I got to deal with this. No, just let him have it. There's nothing wrong with getting ready to get into bed at night or even laying your head on your pillow and saying, Lord, I got all these issues I have to deal with, but right now I need a good night's sleep. You take them. That's the most humble thing you can do. It really is. Just give them over to him. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May God's blessing be upon his people. May your blessing be on your people. Okay. Just a couple things noticed from this. David starts out with, I don't even know, all these enemies, okay? But then he concludes the psalm by saying, I don't care how many enemies I've got. I don't know if he had a figure of tens of thousands. There aren't anywhere near that. There's a handful, okay? Now, they're very powerful, and they're very significant, whether they're Absalom, whether they're Ahithophel, whether it's Ziba, whether it's some of the others that have betrayed David. So he's got his share of enemies. He's got some enemies in powerful places. But he says, but I don't care if there's tens of thousands on every side of me. I don't care. God and I together are greater than them. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Every time I read this verse, I think about, I grew up as a kid watching the old Batman TV show, where Batman and Robin get into a fist fight with Penguin and all his minions, and the screen fills up with pow, socko, wham. Remember all that sort of stuff? You're dating yourself, you remember that. Or you're just into reruns, okay? It could be either one. But strike my enemies on the jaw. It's a debilitating injury. You can knock somebody, you get hit hard, and your head spins around, and it does trauma to your spinal cord for the short term, and out you go. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. I can't do this myself. Okay? Everything in David's life is going wrong. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And he says, it is from the Lord that deliverance comes. But then he closes this. He says, may your blessing be on your people. And here's what I think, in part, that means. As I suggested to you earlier when I was making the announcements over there, that when I get up here and I tell you about Nancy and how she's doing, I have to be very careful about that, because I can abuse this position. Because I get up here and I talk about, there's others of us that are, I know that. And I understand that. And I apologize if I seem like I've ever been just simply putting our family needs first. That's not my intention whatsoever. And if I have, I apologize for that. But I realize that we're just we're just a couple of a church full of people. And we have our struggles, and you have yours. There are others who are undergoing surgery. That's why my good brother Terry Hoofman has been such a good reminder of that to me. Not by his words, just by his presence there. Terry would be here in a heartbeat if he could. Well, maybe not today, he's on vacation. But if he could be here every week, he would be here. He would. And I would encourage you to encourage him. I would encourage you to send him a card, phone call, whatever. And I would encourage you to do that with any number of people. There's all kinds of folks. If you don't know who they all are, many of them are in the bulletin. Talk with Donna. She can give you names. May God's blessing be on your people. When I ask for prayer for my wife, and you ask for prayer for yourself or your family or whatever, this is something that's very, very important. It's from the Lord that deliverance comes. May God's blessing be on all of his people. If I start to sound like I'm being focused on me and not on you properly, feel free to call me on that, okay? And because this is what it's all about. David is praying for himself, but his conclusion to this psalm is, I want God to bless all of his people. My prayer is that the blessing of God, do I want my wife to get better? Of course. But my prayer, my much bigger prayer, is that all of you will experience the blessing of God. There's all kinds of ways that happens. By the way, a lot of you still have not taken advantage of your subscription to Right Now Media. Because I can go online and I can see, that person hasn't signed up yet. I know who you are, and I know where you live, and I will find you, okay? No, seriously, it's there. And some of you still have not. If you're having problems signing up, let me know. That's a marvelous, marvelous resource for you and for your family and friends around you. You talk about a non-threatening, well-done, non-real-time kind of thing. What do I mean by that? I mean, you can talk to somebody face-to-face and say, hey, I'd love to have you come to church. Can you come this Sunday? Don't know. When you're in real time right there, it can be a little intimidating. But if you can say to somebody, hey, got this great resource. Let me send you an email. Check it out. This is our men's group is talking about this. Our women's group is looking at this, or whatever it is. That's a marvelous way to bring a blessing to someone else. May your blessing be on your people. I do want to thank you for your prayers for Nancy, but I want to thank you for your prayers for everybody that needs it. Pray for Nancy, the other Nancy, Donna's daughter Nancy. Pray for Terry Hoofman. Pray for all the others that are listed in the bulletin and others that have needs. And keep your ear listening, because some folks don't say a whole lot, but they really need our prayer. So may God's blessing truly be on his people. Let's pray.